So what if I told you that the original plot for Inside Out was completely different? Characters were deleted, entire storylines were scrapped, and scenes that would have drastically changed the movie never made it to the final cut. And while you might have heard of some of these, today I've gathered every deleted scene, concept art, cut emotion, and major change that I could find for Inside Out. From joy and fear's original pairing, to 27 different emotions being considered, to a much darker version of Bong. The original story for Inside Out was crazy. Now, before we get into all of the deleted content, you need to understand that Inside Out went through one of the most radical transformations of any Pixar film. Director Pete Docter has said that it took 5.5 years to develop, and the story changed dramatically. The film we know and love today, centered on joy and sadness learning to work together, started as something completely different. In fact, for most of the film's development, sadness wasn't even a co-protagonist. That's right, sadness didn't exist. The emotional core of the movie, the relationships between characters, and even which emotions appeared in Riley's head, changed countless times. According to editor Kevin Nolting, 7 complete versions of Inside Out were created before production even began. During the storyboarding process alone, 27 sequences and 178,000 storyboard outlines were developed, with 127,000 making it to completion. That means over 50,000 storylines were cut. One of the biggest changes to Inside Out was that for most of the film's production, the main duo wasn't joy and sadness. It was actually joy and fear. Fear, voiced by Bill Hader, was originally supposed to be the emotion who gets lost with joy and goes on the journey back to headquarters. Sadness played a much smaller role in this version of the movie. According to Pete Docter, fear was called Freddy in this early draft. Yeah, that's right. The emotions actually had names early in production. Definitely would have made it more confusing to compare the emotional world to the real world. The deleted scenes from the Blu-ray release featured this joy-fear pairing, and it's fascinating to see how different the story actually was. Pete Docter explained the logic behind pairing joy and fear was that they chose fear because it felt like junior high. So many people's decisions are based on the fear of what somebody might say or notice, so pairing joy and fear felt like it made sense. Fear is an anchor and joy is going to pull him forward, which leads fear down a road that is quite surprising, which we'll get to later. The original story focused on Riley's transition to middle school, not the family moving to San Francisco. Joy was struggling to hold onto Riley's childhood, while Riley was naturally growing up and becoming more cautious and fearful. When Riley embarrassed herself on her first day of middle school, it was Joy's fault for trying to keep things too happy and childlike, which this whole story kind of idea does translate into Inside Out 2, as we know. But it's interesting that this was going to be the original concept for the first movie. Fear was supposed to be the voice of reason, the practical one who understood that Riley needed to mature. The journey would have been about Joy learning from fear that caution and wariness have their place in growing up, which we do learn that this kind of goes hand in hand with anxiety in Inside Out 2. Anxiety takes that fear role when she gets to middle school, but it's so interesting to me to hear that these storylines were originally thought of 10 years prior to us getting a sequel, and how the movie we did get for the first one was completely different. But here's where everything gets dark. In one version of the joy-fear story, fear actually became villainous. Yeah, you remember the part I was saying that we were going to get to? Yeah, fear was a bad guy. According to production notes, there was a sequence where fear tried to capture Joy and prevent her from returning to headquarters. He believed that Joy was holding Riley back, and that Riley would be better off without optimism clouding her judgment. This would have made Inside Out much more of a darker film, with one of Riley's own emotions sabotaging another, which I'm not gonna lie, would have been pretty cool to see. I love the classic villain story, so I'm here for that. Let me know down in the comments if you guys agree. Although, having fear as an antagonist would have sent the wrong message about that emotion's importance. If they would have kept fear as a villain, it would have showed that fear was a bad emotion to have, which is kind of against the whole point of the movie. The movie shows that every emotion is needed to be a human, to be a person. So with fear being a villain and essentially destroyed, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense, now would it? After years of development with the joy-fear pairing, Pete Docter and the team hit a wall. The story wasn't working emotionally. As Docter explained, I feel like the core emotion, the core kind of thing that we are talking about, was a sort of loss of childhood. And that's a sad moment as opposed to a fear-based thing. And that is where things changed. The breakthrough came when Docter and editor Kevin Nolting met with John Lasseter, Pixar's chief creative officer, and proposed swapping fear for sadness, and Lasseter immediately agreed. As Pete Docter told the Pixar Brain Trust, instead of joy learning from fear about caution, joy needs to learn from sadness about the importance of accepting difficult emotions. And that entire reframe, that entire change, changed everything. It changed the entire story that they wanted to tell. Producer Jonas Rivera said that replacing fear with sadness gave the story a much juicier role for the second emotion and created the emotional resonance the film needed. The loss of childhood isn't scary. It's quite sad, actually. It's one that I have told people multiple times to keep that child within you alive. And that's kind of what Disney does for me. And more importantly, sadness is what allows us to process change, connect with others, and grow. This change came shockingly late in production. According to multiple sources, the swap from fear to sadness happened after more than 2 years of development. That meant redoing thousands of storyboards, rewriting the script, and fundamentally reimagining the entire film. This situation reminds me so much like Frozen. If you guys remember from my Frozen video, we talked about how Frozen completely changed the whole storyboards when they made the Let It Go song. This is quite similar for Inside Out when they decided to replace fear as a villain with a whole new character, Sadness. I can't imagine going through multiple different reiterations and changes in a script and animations after working so hard on the past ones. It's kind of crazy. In early development, Pete Docter and his team considered featuring 27 different emotions in Riley's head. According to interviews, these included hope, irritation, envy, greed, despair, depression, love, shame, which was later considered for Inside Out 2, among a bunch of other ones. This list came from consulting with Dr. Paul Ekman, a psychologist who provided Pixar with research on universal emotions. Ekman's list included anger, fear, sadness, disgust, contempt, surprise, and happiness. But after Pete Docter talked to him, he came up with some key concepts and ideas. Surprise was cut because it felt too similar to fear. Contempt was removed for being too complex for audiences, and happiness was renamed optimism, and then joy to better reflect the character's role, which left the final 5 emotions for the movie: joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust. These 5 core emotions were chosen for being instantly recognizable and relatable, as well as being very distinct from each other. But that's not all the concepts that were deleted from this movie. The Inside Out Blu-ray included 4 major deleted scenes, all featuring storyboarding animation with full voice acting and Pete Docter commentary. These scenes show us the joy-fear version of the film. The first scene, titled Riley Grows Up, comes from the version where joy and fear were the main pair. The emotions notice that Riley is changing as she enters middle school. In the scene, Riley is becoming more self-conscious and worried about what others think. She desperately tries to keep things fun and carefree, but fear keeps pointing out potential social disasters. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
We have no friends and we die alone.
Okay.
The conflict between Joy's desire to preserve childhood and fear's awareness that Riley needs to mature drives the tension in this scene. What's fascinating is that in this version, Joy isn't entirely, sympathetic. She's actually holding Riley back by refusing to let her grow up naturally. The scene includes a moment where Joy suggests,
We should spit in that girl's face.
yeah, that doesn't quite sound like Joy now, does it? A shockingly aggressive suggestion that Pete Docter admits was part of a misguided attempt to make Joy more funny. Yeah, because spitting in someone's face is definitely the best joke I would come up with. I get why it was deleted. This version of Joy was too evil, too mean, which created a major problem. If your protagonist is unlikable, the audiences aren't going to root for them. Hence why this scene was scrapped. The second deleted scene, titled Joy's Decline, is one of the most emotionally powerful deleted scenes. In Joy's Decline, Joy struggles to understand why Riley's behavior is becoming so limited and restricted as she grows older. Joy can't comprehend why Riley doesn't want to do fun, childish things anymore. She's confused and frustrated by the boundaries that keep appearing. Riley won't climb trees, won't play make-believe, won't sing loudly in public. Joy interprets this as something going wrong rather than natural maturing. The scene shows Joy's growing desperation and confusion as she realizes she's losing control. It's actually quite sad watching Joy break down in this scene. Someone that is typically confident and knows what she's going to do, falling apart as she fails to try to keep Joy happy. And then we see this concept actually being used later in Inside Out 2. While this scene has emotional weight, it was cut because it made Joy seem too incompetent and unaware. The final version of Joy is optimistic, but not delusional. She understands Riley is struggling, she just believes happiness is always the answer. Which does feel like a better direction for the first movie, as she is trying to keep a changing Riley happy, which is what really drives that entire movie. The third deleted scene was called Misdirection. In this deleted scene, Joy and Fear encounter a group of Riley's retired imaginary friends while lost in long-term memory. These forgotten friends have set up a small community, almost like a town for retired childhood figures. Among these retired imaginary friends is an early version of Bing Bong, and he's very different from the one that we got in the final movie. According to Pete Docter's commentary, this version of Bing Bong was a much darker character, often commenting on how he doesn't like how Riley is growing up, and intentionally disrupting construction processes in her mind. Yeah, that's right, the Bing Bong that we know and love and all cried when he disappeared was actually kind of a meanie head. This dark Bing Bong resented being forgotten. He was bitter, angry, and actively tried to sabotage Riley's mental development. The retired imaginary friends would immediately invite Joy to stay and live with them, but Joy refused because she believed she was still important to Riley's mind. It's easy to see why this version of Bing Bong was changed. The final film's Bing Bong is tragic because he's so sweet and selfless. He actually sacrifices himself for Joy to get out, because he genuinely wants Riley happy, even if it means that she's forgotten him. This bitter, resentful Bing Bong wouldn't have nearly the same emotional impact. The fourth deleted scene, titled Construction, actually shows Joy being guided through Riley's mind by a non-conformist version of Bing Bong, who is outraged by the demolition of older areas like Imagination Park. In this version, Riley's mind is undergoing massive construction and renovation as she matures. Childhood areas are literally being bulldozed to make room for more mature structures. Bing Bong acts as a protester, trying to stop the demolition. The scene includes some interesting world building about how minds change as people grow, but it was ultimately too heavy-handed as a metaphor. The final film shows similar concepts more subtly through the crumbling of personality islands. But one of the coolest and most interesting deleted concept is this next one. One of the most fascinating deleted concepts is something that would have fundamentally changed how the emotions interact with Riley. It included a microphone at the control console. According to Pete Docter, they'd be like the voices in her head, and they would suggest things she should say or act upon. In this version, the emotions could speak directly to Riley, though she wouldn't talk back. They could whisper suggestions, encourage certain actions, or warn her about dangers. Essentially, they would be the literal voices in your head, which is a cool concept to even think about, because that is what our emotions do, right? Most of the times when we're going through something, or we're freaking out about something, or we're excited about something, it's usually a voice in the back of our head being like, yeah, you could do it, go get them. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting that there could have literally been a moment where these emotions could directly meet, essentially, and talk to Riley. This concept was ultimately scrapped because it made the emotions too powerful and too directly controlling. In the final film, emotions influence Riley by pressing buttons that trigger feelings, but they can't directly tell her what to do. This is more psychologically accurate, as we don't really hear our emotions speaking to us, we just feel their effects. But it is interesting if we thought that way. Also, having the emotions constantly narrating and suggesting would have been overwhelming for audiences and would have taken away from Riley's agency. She needed to be making her own choices based on how she felt, not following direct commands from her emotions. So I get why it was deleted, but it would have been a cool concept to actually have the emotions talk to Riley directly. I think kids would have gotten a kick out of that, but I also understand that really at the core of the emotional of the story, we need to be making our own decision based on how we feel. And that can't be influenced by someone literally telling you what to do, but it would have been cool. But this next thing is actually very dark for a kids movies. And I get why they were going to go down this path, but it makes sense it was cut. Pete Docter originally considered having Riley fall into a deep clinical depression as the film's main conflict. As Pete Docter told the New York Times in 2015, we initially considered sending Riley into a deep depression, but we realized that was not very appropriate. The filmmakers consulted with psychologists and neuroscientists throughout production, and these experts explained that depression is actually the absence of emotion, a clinical shutdown of emotional response. It's not something that can be dramatized through colorful emotion characters running around. And more importantly, Personally, clinical depression might have been way too deep for a family film. I mean, that stuff is heavy. The final version, where Riley becomes emotionally numb and plans to run away, is serious enough. I mean, literally that scene enough will make anyone cry. Having her fall into genuine depression would have been devastating and potentially triggering for viewers dealing with mental health issues. Now, saying that, we did get an anxiety attack in Inside Out 2, which is already deep enough, and they did it beautifully in animation. So, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like Pixar, if they went in this direction, I definitely would have trusted them to treat it with grace and would have had the animation shown beautifully. So part of me kind of wishes this would have happened, because a lot of people go through depression on a daily. There was also an entire sequence that was storyboarded but never animated, where Joy's desperation to keep things happy ruins Riley's middle school play. In this version, Riley is performing in a school production, and Joy is so determined to keep Riley happy and confident that she ignores warning signs that Riley is anxious and overwhelmed. Joy keeps pushing Riley to be cheerful and outgoing on stage, which backfires badly. Riley ends up having a panic attack during the performance, humiliating herself in front of the entire school. This traumatic experience would have been a major turning point in the story, showing Joy that forcing happiness can actually make things worse. And while this scene could have been emotionally powerful, considering this is exactly what they did with Inside Out 2, it was cut because in this version of the movie, Riley was already struggling enough. Adding another public humiliation scene would have made the movie feel more punishing rather than sympathetic. As mentioned earlier, Bing Bong underwent massive changes from his original conception. Beyond being darker and more resentful, there were other fascinating details surrounding the early concept version of Bing Bong. Production notes mentioned that early versions of Bing Bong could actually fly, which didn't make it to the final film because it wasn't based on any flying animals. The final Bing Bong is part car, part elephant, part dolphin, none of which can fly, although he does send Joy soaring on his little wagon, so maybe in our imagination. Richard Kind, who voices Bing Bong, modeled the character's personality and mannerisms on Oliver Hardy, Jimmy Durante, and especially John Candy's performance in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. The filmmakers wanted Bing Bong to have the same lovable, slightly bumbling quality that made Candy so endearing in that movie. Also in early drafts, Bing Bong was meant to represent Joy's own childhood innocence. His death was supposed to symbolize Joy finally accepting that childhood must end. While that theme remains in the final film, it's much more subtle. And I think that works well for audiences, especially for kids that are trying to understand what this movie is actually about than just a bunch of emotions running around. According to producer Jonas Rivera, initial storyboarding showed the importance of Riley's character arc rather than her emotions. In other words, in early versions of this story, most of it was focused on Riley's real life instead of in her head with the emotions. Rivera notes that they eventually decided the balance should be about 75% inside, 25% out. The final film definitely prioritizes the emotions journey over Riley's real-world experiences. However, there were entire sequences of Riley's life that were storyboarded and then cut. The first was Riley attending a concert she doesn't want to attend, showing that she is changing tastes. Another was Take Your Daughter to Work Day, which only makes Riley wish she were at school instead, as well as more detailed sequences of Riley exploring San Francisco and trying to make new friends. These scenes were cut because they slowed down the pacing and took focus away from the central conflict happening inside Riley's mind. And although it would have been cool to definitely see more of Riley in this movie, I think the little bit of sequences we did get made those sequences even more impactful. So kudos to the filmmakers for cutting a lot of her scenes. Also, in an earlier version of the film, the plot revolved around a core memory that slipped away from Joy's hands and fell deep into long-term memory. Instead of all 5 core memories being taken, it was just one, and Joy and Fear's entire journey was about trying to retrieve this single lost memory before Riley's personality fundamentally changed. This was changed because having multiple core memories raised the stakes. If Joy loses all 5, Riley's entire personality structure collapses. Losing just one would have felt less urgent. Plus, seeing these personality islands being destroyed one by one builds up conflict. It builds up anxiety for us as viewers, being like, are they going to be able to save Riley from her own mind? Perhaps the biggest challenge during development was making Joy likable. According to Doctor and Rivera, test audiences repeatedly said, I don't like Joy. I'm not rooting for her. I'm annoyed by her. And I'm not gonna lie, even in the final version, sometimes I'm like, Joy is so annoying. I feel for her sometimes, but man, is she annoying sometimes. This was devastating feedback because Joy is the protagonist. If audiences don't like your main character, your movie is kind of in trouble. The problem was that early versions of Joy were just too chipper and oblivious. As Doctor said, if you make her just chipper and come on everybody, let's do this, you're like, somebody take her out back, you know? It's just not real. Joy's characterization was completely dependent on her voice actress. When Amy Poehler was cast, she brought a knowing, slightly sarcastic edge to Joy that made her feel more real. Amy Poehler understood how to balance enthusiasm with self-awareness, making Joy funny without being annoying. Pete Docter credits Poehler with essentially saving the character. She just had the ability to be able to know how much of the enthusiasm to balance with just little bits of sarcasm and undercutting to make it feel more truthful. Which is a prime example of sometimes a voice actress being cast and being able to save a character completely. Because a character on paper might not be the same way that a person brings that character to life. So it's really cool that Joy actually changed a lot just from casting Amy. Pete Docter has said that every emotion except joy was easier to write. Anger, fear, disgust, and sadness all have strong, clear personalities that are fun to write dialogue for. Joy, being positive and optimistic, was much harder to make interesting. As Docter explained, that's true of comedy writing in general. If you have a broken character who's flawed, it's much more fun and more relatable somehow. But these deleted concepts and characters and decisions also all evolved because of one decision by Walt Disney's daughter. In October 2011, Diane Disney Miller, Walt Disney's daughter, persuaded Pete Docter to simplify Inside Out and refocus the story. This led to the creation of the Personality Islands concept, which integrated the mind's geography with the story. Before this, the different areas of Riley's mind were more randomly organized. The idea of having literal islands representing core aspects of Riley's personality, the Family Island, Friendship Island, Hockey Island, Goofball Island, and Honesty Island, came relatively late in development. And this was actually brilliant because it gave meaning to these core development personality traits of Riley. You can actually see these islands crumbling as she is going through what she's going through. We're literally watching Riley lose parts of her identity. According to production designer Ralph Eggleston, he specifically recommended setting the film in Riley's mind rather than in her brain, and a few scenes about the brain were dropped. This kept the film focused on emotion rather than biology. And speaking of Diane Disney Miller, she played a very fascinating role in Inside Out's development. In 2011, she allowed Pete Docter and his team to hold multiple work sessions at the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. This wasn't just about providing workspace. Miller actively participated in story discussions and helped Docter refocus the film when it was struggling. Having Walt Disney's daughter invested in the project and providing creative guidance is a fascinating piece of Pixar history. They literally were able to work with Walt Disney's own kin. That is pretty cool if you ask me. Inside Out is very specifically set in San Francisco and Minnesota before the move, and the team did extensive research trips to both locations. Originally, Riley's hometown was going to be kept vague, but the team decided that being specific would make the story feel more real and grounded. Minnesota was chosen as Riley's original home because it's very different from San Francisco climate-wise. It also represents the Midwest American experience, and Pete Docter actually grew up in Minnesota, giving the film personal resonance. The San Francisco sequences were carefully researched, with the team visiting specific neighborhoods, restaurants, and locations that appear in the film, which really just shows how much goes into crafting a story at Pixar Animation Studios. Literally visiting towns, visiting locations, to actually include those related topics in the movie makes the film that much better. Inside Out was released on June 19th, 2015, and became both a critically and commercial success, earning over $858 million worldwide, and winning the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. But more importantly, it changed how we talk about emotions. And that to me is just beautiful. So there you have it, all of the deleted scenes, concepts, characters, and stories that would have changed Inside Out completely. From Joy and Fear's original pairing, to the microphone that let emotion speak directly to Riley, to a much darker version of Bong. These deleted elements show us the incredible amount of work that goes into crafting a Pixar masterpiece. What's most remarkable is that nearly every deletion made Inside Out better. Reducing 27 emotions to 5 made the story comprehensible. Making Joy flawed but likable gave us a protagonist protagonist worth rooting for, and changing Bing Bong from bitter to selfless gave us one of Pixar's most heartbreaking moments. The deleted content shows alternate paths of a story that could have been, but the final version of the film is the one that needed to exist. It's a film about accepting all of your emotions, even the difficult ones, and ironically, the filmmakers had to accept that some of their favorite ideas didn't belong in the story. But what do you guys think? Would you have wanted to see a more evil version of Bing Bong or Joy? Should there have been more than 5 emotions in this first movie? Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, check out this video right here because YouTube and I recommend it, and I think you'll enjoy it if you enjoyed this one. Or check out this entire playlist of a bunch of deleted concepts and stories from a bunch of different movies. And I, Josh Beatty, will see you guys over there. Bye-bye.